Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now, back to the show. Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Calix Lewis Reneau. He's an author, a producer, a screenwriter, a film director, and a television producer. We're going to talk about Dancing with the Black Dog, A Survivor's Guide to Depression. He's the author of that book, and we're going to talk about his personal experiences as well. So, Calix, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, if you would, tell me a bit about your background and how you got into, TV-related type stuff, and I guess we'll weave in the depression story as well.
Alrighty. So, I moved to LA in 91. I've been here for a little over 30 years. And in my life, I've done basically 3 different gigs. Either I've worked in construction, I've been a musician, and I've been a writer. And around the turn of the century, and isn't it fun that we can now say turn of the century? Around the turn of the century, I kind of focused on movies and television because I figured I was all over the map at that time. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since. I moved into producing full-time, writing and producing full-time in 2009. So that's what I do.
Okay. And how did the idea for the book come about?
I don't know how the idea specifically came about. I've suffered from major clinical depression. They call it a bunch of different things. I'm still not sure what to call it. All my life, ever since I was a teenager, and I'm 60 now. So the black dog's been a constant part of my life for half a century now. And among other things, I suppose I wanted my struggles to have some sort of meaning, and I decided, well, if I can explain to other people how I made it to 60 with a life full of suicidal depression, it might help them, and that brings some value out of my.
So what has it been like for you? Does depression come upon you just out of the blue? Like what does a down episode look like for you?
Like I said, it's constant clinical major depression. I'm in a fairly good mood right now because I get to talk to you, which is always fun. But like earlier today, I was just had to wrestle with the black dog some, which I try to turn into dancing and try to turn into productivity, which is what the book's about.
Well, what does that mean? What happens when you get depressed, and what coping strategies or skills have you learned to help yourself?
Okay, so that's literally what the book is about. And I've been through just about every kind of treatment you can for major depression. I spent a period of about 5 years where I was trying different SSRIs. I think I even tried an MAO inhibitor at one point. Lots of various kinds of therapy. I hit upon that cognitive therapy works for me best, self-talk and regulating that. And so what I mean, I have fairly regular suicidal impulses and ideation. That's kind of the black dog that I live with. I have to be careful. So I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about some of what I talk in the book. It'll kind of help explain this. One of the key things that I realized about depression, or about my depression, the studying that I've done leads me to believe that it's a huge biochemical issue in addition to an intellectual. And my decided to my biochemistry is messed up. There's a hereditary component to it. There's a history of depression in my family, also a history of addictive behaviors, which often goes along with that. And what I realized is that before I knew what was going on, so I'd have this really bad feeling. I'd have a feeling of anger, self-loathing, anxiety, unhappiness, all of those things. And since human beings, we are fundamentally creatures of story. That's what brought us to the top of the food chain, is our ability to tell stories, recognize patterns, and take from the past and project into the future. And we believe our emotions have to have meaning. So if I'm feeling really, really horrible, there should be a reason why I'm feeling really, really horrible. If I'm feeling really, really horrible, and the story I tell myself is I feel really horrible because I am horrible and I'm a terrible person, then that's the story that I'm going to act on. A pastor of mine once said fairly brilliantly that the suicidal impulse is actually a correct one. It's just aimed in the wrong direction. When you're feeling suicidal, something has to die, or something has to change, something has to be confronted. And in my case, it was the stories that I was telling myself about my screwed up biochemistry, that my brain juice was not behaving like it's supposed to. And as a rational being, I was trying to come up with stories as to why that was. And a lot of it, especially for depressed people, goes into, well, I feel terrible, so I must be a terrible person. I feel anxious, so I must deserve anxiety. Frustration, so I must deserve that in some regard. And we end up reinforcing that story. And one of the more insidious things about depression and other mental difficulties is that science has shown that I can literally change my brain chemistry by how I'm thinking. So if my brain chemistry is screwed up for whatever reason and I feel bad, if I focus on that and I come up with reasons why I feel bad, I am simply amplifying that bad feeling. And one of the fundamental principles of the book is that emotions are the most fundamental level we exist. It's our lizard brain, our brain stem. It's baseline of how we exist. You can work up through the physical, the intellectual, and I happen to believe that there's a spiritual self as well at the very top. And what I realized I was doing was I was allowing that lizard brain, those emotions, to dictate what my story is. And that obviously doesn't make sense. You don't let the lowest part of you tell you what you are. And so the cognitive part of it for me is I'm constantly evaluating my story about, okay, my highest self, my spiritual self, with the hopes and dreams that wants to behave out of love and community and so forth. What does that say I should be, and how does that say I should act? And I use that as kind of a reality check against what the black dog is trying to convince me.
Right. So how do you do a reality check when you're in the depths of depression? What do you do?
Well, one of the things that I do is I'll check with other people. I'm married. I'll ask my wife, and I'm like, am I being a real jerk right now? Am I doing bad and mean things? And she'll go, well, no. Like, okay, then obviously that's wrong. One of the little tricks that I use, at night, it gets darker, so it gets darker inside. And sometimes I'll be lying in bed and I'll have a really strong suicidal impulse. And rather than trying to fight it, I will kind of pretend like that's another part of me. And I will say, okay, I understand you have this really strong suicidal impulse and it makes total sense right now. I'll tell you what, I'm going to check with our highest self tomorrow when they come back around. And if they say, go ahead and do it, we'll do it then. But we're not going to do it right now, because we don't know if it's really accurate. And that helps me get through the night sometimes. Like, okay, yeah, I'm going to kill myself, but I'm not going to do it till tomorrow. And that's one of the many little story tricks that I've learned to play on myself. I'm
sure you've tried all kinds of things to help yourself. What are some of those things, and what's been helpful to you or not so helpful in your journey? I'm
a little frustrated with pharmaceutical approaches, primarily because as we discussed, I'm a writer, director, musician, and the SSRIs did help ameliorate the strongest depressive symptoms, but they also just killed my creativity. And so, a lot of people who do those kind of medications describe what I had, which was a feeling of numbness. And yeah, I wasn't thinking as much about the dark stuff, but I couldn't be creative. And so it was a downward slope that was shallower than I'm used to, but there was no up. There was no way to fight my way out of it. So I strongly recommend anybody dealing with depression or any other mental issues to not take medications off the table. You just have to understand how to work with them. Like I said, for me, the most powerful tool for me, like I said, is cognitive therapy, which is the self-talk, which is, it can be as simple as there have been days when it's like, okay, all I can manage today is to get out of bed. If I get out of bed and eat something, then that's going to count as a victorious day because I don't want to do that. Or, I have to get a shower and go for a walk at least today. And if that's all I can accomplish today, then that is a victory. That is better than I would have done if I not put the effort, and learning not to minimize the small victories, the small gain. And that's, again, just going back to what the book is, the first 20 pages are about kind of the overall theory, and literally every other chapter after that is just something you can try to deal with depression, from celebrating the small victories, all the way up to the much more complicated stuff.
So is there no way for you to quote unquote be cured or be not feel depression anymore? It's just, you have to live with it. What's your thoughts?
It's interesting because I've got, I haven't sold a lot of books and I've had some reviews on it. And the only non-5-star review on Amazon that I've gotten was from somebody who said, wait a minute, I thought he was going to tell me how to cure this. He's just telling me how to live with it. I've gone through periods in my life when it has been much lessened. I've tried a lot of different things, some good, some bad. And that's one of the reasons I've kind of embraced the metaphor of the black dog, which is an old metaphor for depression, most famously used by Churchill. Dexter, the TV series, he talked about his dark passenger. And it's sort of that same thing. It's like, okay, I've got this. I don't know if it's going to go away. Nothing I've ever tried has made it go away. And like I said, it's been 50 years of this. I don't know. I don't know if it's curable in my case, or I don't know if it's curable in other people's cases. I just don't know. But whatever it is, I have to deal with it today as it is.
So the best you found is to manage it with all these, this self-talk and these tricks that you developed over time.
Yeah, boy, it's depressing when you put it like that.
Oh, it's realistic. I mean, I guess you have a very realistic approach to it. I know, have there been times where it really hasn't affected you much and other times where it's affected you a lot?
Yeah, I once literally spent a year and a half in bed. Basically, I was sleeping 20 to 22 hours a day. Weirdly, I was also taking a college course. So I'd get up, get out of bed, eat something, go to the class, come back and go back to bed. And that was about a year and a half. I have been hospitalized on a 5150, which is when it's involuntary. And like I said, I've been through a lot of different therapies. It's weird because this seasonal affective disorder, SAD, which is, the wintertime blues, so to speak, it's usually pretty hard for me. And this last winter it felt harder than it had before, more difficult to stay motivated and get things done. But I also feel like with the tools I've developed over the years that I do better in those times. It's like, sometimes I think, sometimes I'll have an emotional experience. I'll have a period of deeper depression. And my story I'll tell myself is, wow, actually, if I had gone through this level of depression 10 years ago, I would be behaving much worse. But because I have these tools and I have the story that I tell myself, I'm functioning better and I'm getting things done. So, yeah.
Again, have there been times where it's been relatively easy to deal with it? I'm sure there's been plenty of times where it's been very difficult to deal with it. But is there anything in your life that makes it worse or easier to deal with that you've identified?
Being able to be creative, whether it's in music or writing or filmmaking. My happiest place is to be on a set as a producer, or better as a writer director. That environment I enjoy very, very much. There is always a sense of one of the weird things about depression for me is that when I am depressed, when it's particularly bad, I cannot evoke even the memory of what it's like not to be like that. But when I am happy and doing well and getting things done, I absolutely can remember what depression is like. And I can absolutely remember what that set of circumstance feels like, what that emotions, what that difficulty is. I have no problem at all remembering what depression is like when I'm doing better. But when I'm depressed, it's incredibly difficult to try to remember. And that's when it becomes, again, an act of will, an act of, okay, this is what I am choosing to believe in spite of how I feel. So this is how I'm to behave. It's weird because a lot of people who get to know me will tell me after they get to know me, is like, oh, wow, you really are depressed, because I try not to project that out in the world. I try not to behave that way. I also try not to let my illness, what I believe is a true biological defect, to become the dictator of how I'm going to live my life or what I'm going to do or how I'm going to behave. I still, I try to take moral responsibility for my choices. And if I'm a jerk to somebody, it doesn't matter if I was super depressed at the moment, I was still a jerk to somebody. I'm responsible for dealing with that. And
how do you do that? How do you do that when, I would guess, when you first experienced depressive states, it was probably incredibly hard to deal with. How did you transition to where, even if you're very depressed, you have the wherewithal to at least say, all right, when I'm feeling better, I'm going to apologize to this person, or, okay, I'm feeling depressed right now, so I'm not going to make any big decisions, or,
right.
Whatever it is. How did you get the presence of mind when you're in the throes of like a very difficult time to help yourself?
I keep using the word story a lot, and that's very fundamental to my approach. There's a lot of science out there about how we interact in the world with the world. For example, 80% of your vision is colorblind. I don't know if you know that or not. And your brain, as you're looking, your brain is actually filling in a lot of those colors based on what it knows. If you keep your head looking straight forward as just a quick experiment, look at the wall in front of you, and then just move your eyes really quickly to the left and then back again. If you'll notice, there's a quick black spot. Basically your optic nerve shuts down when your eye moves fast because it can't process. Your brain can't process that information. So a lot of what we even see isn't real. It's our brain making stuff up based on what it's already experienced. And because my approach to life, my approach to art is as a storyteller, and I'm fascinated by story, that really dovetailed nicely into cognitive therapy for me, which is, okay, what is the story I want to live? What is the story I want to believe? Of everything in my story, the part with the least amount of actual evidence is that we have a spiritual self. We have a highest self above and beyond our intellectual self, that we transcend death, that we are spiritual beings. There's very little science to support that. Yet that is essential to my story. In the moments, it's like any other muscle. In the moments when I'm feeling more cognizant, when I'm feeling more less driven by emotions, that's when I can say, okay, what is it that I truly believe? Who is it that I truly want to be? And I establish that as that's what I'm going to aim for. And so when my physical self is wanting to just feed my appetites for good or for bad, and my emotional self is all spinning off doing whatever it's doing, my intellectual self goes, okay, spiritual self says that it knows this is going to happen. And so here are the rules we're going to live by. And yes, we can renegotiate these, but we can't do that until we talk to spiritual self. Now, obviously, I do not exist as four separate beings, and the black dog is not an actual dog that I'm dealing with. These are all just metaphors and ways of looking at reality, ways of looking at my life that are functional. One of the quips I came up, or I don't know what you call it, one of the sentences I came up within the book was that something is useful insofar as it is true, and it is true insofar as it is useful. And for me, it's that constant re-examining my story, because all of our stories are fiction. Like even our the things that we see that we think are in color, but we're not getting that information. That's a fiction our brains are creating based on reality. And so the question is, what story do we want to live? And how do we determine that? And that's how I approach it. It's like, okay, what is the story of Calix? Who is he? How does he live his life? How does he interact with other people? And if my emotions tell me something different, I can choose to behave otherwise.
I mean, again, I guess I don't understand how, like, if you're feeling really angry or depressed, sad, or like you just don't want to do anything, and but you have to interact with somebody like, let's say your wife or, an outside person. What do you do to make yourself okay enough to be able to do that?
Right. A lot of it is hard because sometimes I can't, and I have to recognize that, there are some nights when I'm just getting angry for no reason, and my wife and I are just watching television, and I want to snap out of a bunch of things, and I'm like, okay, I'm not fit for human company now. So I say, I'm going to bed, and I will go and lie in bed and not talk to anybody, not do anything. Even, normally I go to bed late. So I don't care, I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock tonight, and I'm giving you the space. I'll tell you, one of the things that I do is I make myself stay up. I work from home, and my wife works out of home, and I stay up late on Fridays and Saturdays just so that she can have mornings in peace. I try not to get out of bed until noon, just, to protect her from that sort of thing. Again, the book starts with, in terms of strategies, it was literally, so the way the book is set up is each chapter is 2 pages, and those 2 pages are facing each other. So literally you open up the book at random, and you're going to open up into a full chapter that is a strategy for how to deal with your life. And very first one is, if you can get out of bed, get out of bed. If that's all you can do, that's an acceptable strategy. And the people who I deal with more intimately, my close friends and family, I say, hey, look, I can't do any more than this right now. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to try really hard not to hurt people. And it goes all the way through dealing with medications. It goes through, drinking, recreational pharmaceuticals, which I don't use, all the way up to the best tool is to just get outside of yourself and to feed into other people's lives, do good things for other people, which is what I try to do with my storytelling, and try to create things that help other people to live their best lives. And so anywhere from today, all I can do is get out of bed, up to today, I can jump on a podcast and try to explain what goes on in my life. In whatever I can do, I do it. And if I can't do it, I just, step back till I find the simplest thing that I can do to deal with it that day.
How have you learned to work with your wife so that when she recognizes what's going on with you, that, you don't, let's say, yell at her and take it out on her? Like, how do you navigate your home situation if you're open to talk about it?
I am open to talk about it. I've lived a very strange life, part of which is that I got divorced. I can't remember when. And then about 10 years later, I remarried the same woman. So this is our second time around. We got remarried about 6 or 7 years ago. And it's recognizing when my emotions, what's interesting is the really bad depression is easy to deal with. Because when I'm really depressed, when I'm really having struggles, it's obvious to me, okay, I'm in a really terrible headspace. I've got really crappy brain juice. I need to protect myself and other people from, it's that kind of in between when I'm feeling good and confident and happy between there and I'm feeling super, super depressed when I'm coming out of the seasonal affective disorder, February and March were okay, I would find myself doing and saying things and then go, wait a minute, that's me being a jerk because I'm not recognizing how much the negative emotions are driving that. And a lot of it is learning how to apologize, learning how to take ownership and accountability. Say, yeah, I know what I said and what I did, that was wrong. It was horrible. I don't blame it on my depression. I'm going to try to do better next time. I also, I give people who are close to me, I emphasize to them, I need you to call me out on my bullshit. I need you to, when I am acting badly, I need you to tell me. I don't want you to be nice and pussyfoot around it. And I have a small circle of very close people who will do that for me. Like, dude, Calix, you're being an asshole. Stop it. Like, oh, okay. That's a reality. Again, going back to reality checking, you have to have people who you can trust to tell you that. And it takes the power of the intellect over the power of the emotion to be able to do that. And it's a muscle. And, frankly, as a teenager, one of the very bizarre things of human development is that men's brains don't really become adults until they're 25. So basically from the time you hit puberty at 13 or 14 to the time you hit 25, you're driving a man's body, but you're trying to drive it with a kid's brain. And I didn't know that. And so I made a lot of bad choices and developed a lot of bad habits in those times, some of which I've not been able to overcome, some of which I can overcome sometimes. But again, it all comes back to, if you believe in the highest spiritual self, then you just have to submit to that. And if you don't, then you have to submit to your intellect. Okay, my intellect is smarter than my emotion, and I have found that the story of I'm really pissed off because of what's going on in this moment. I've already recognized, okay, wait a minute, this emotional reaction is way too big for this situation. I was fortunate when I was in high school, I had a teacher who became a lifelong friend who, when I say, oh, I really hate that, he says, man, that's an awful strong emotion to waste on something so trivial. And I've thought about that. Like, I'm really mad at this. Why am I really mad at this? That's an awful strong emotion to react to. And whether it's true or not, that, even if an argument can be made that that level of negative emotion is appropriate to that situation, I can still accept and invest and create the story of, no, it's not. I don't need to react to that the way my emotions are telling me to, because my intellect is controlled. My story is that I have shitty brain juice, and that's what's causing this terrible emotional state, and I am not obligated to behave as if that's the arbiter of reality.
What I've seen with some depressed people, though, is if they're depressed and you confront them and you say, hey, you're being a jerk or an asshole or whatever, then they go to self-pity.
Oh, yeah.
I don't hear a healthy reaction like you're describing. How did you get there? And were you, in the beginning when someone told you, like you said, you tell people to call you out on it, but I don't know. It was like that the whole time.
No, it was not like that the whole time. I mean, I didn't write the book until like 10 or 15 years ago. So it took me 35 years to get to the point where I could even write it down. Like I said, they popped me in the hospital because I've been a danger, and I don't blame them. I'm glad that happened. I've spent a year and a half in bed. That wasn't a really great choice. It's taken me 50 years to get to this point of, constantly dealing with, and I'm gonna shift this just slightly, but this doesn't just apply to depression. Like a lot of people who don't deal with depression who read the book have gone, oh, I don't have to be driven from my emotions. I can examine the story by which I live, and I can choose to tell the story that best appeals to my highest sense, whether it's morality, ethics, or whatever, or spirituality. It's like, oh, I can not be driven reactively. I can choose who I'm going to be. And it is harder. It's like, Schwarzenegger, didn't come out of the womb full of muscles. The great pianists didn't come out that way. Whatever you do, it's because of your choices that you're making. And it took a long time. And, some days I'm not very good at it. Like I said, sometimes I am a total jerk, and sometimes someone will call me out on something and I'll just pout and stomp around and do a pity party or whatever. But, eventually I intentionally try to guide myself back to what I think is my highest self, to be the best person that I can, and to feed into other people's lives so they can be the best person they can. And frankly, regardless of if God is real or there's an afterlife, that's a more fulfilling way to live, to try to be my best self and help other people. Ultimately, that's more satisfying. Now, yeah, I'll be depressed and I'll go down to the grocery store and get a half gallon of ice cream and inhale that stuff because I trained myself that food can help fix this, and it does, but it also has downsides like type 2 diabetes that I'm now struggling with because I spent so much time using chocolate and sugar as a chemical for my brain chemistry. But I'll still, if it's between my diabetes and black dog, I'm beating down the black dog with the ice cream, and I'll deal with the diabetes tomorrow. So it's all about the hierarchy of choices that we make. And ultimately, it's recognizing that depression or not, everybody has those choices. A side story about this, my son has ADHD, and he's still dealing with it as an adult. And when he was in high school, they put him on, it was Ritalin first, I think he's an Adderall. And what I told him from my experience is that, with my own mental issues, is that medication is not going to solve his ADHD. It's going to give him a slight edge on it, going to take care of about 5% of it. The rest of it is a matter of will. And I believe very strongly that will, that's where we tell ourselves these stories. And ultimately, it's worth it to me to try to be this person that my higher self wants to be. And that's why every day it's the same process. Do good as much as I can and try to do as little harm as possible.
So if you're in a bad way, and someone says, Calix, you're being a real jerk, like, how do you react now? What do you feel and what do you go through when someone says that? What's your mental process?
A lot of times I will. I'll just get flushed with anger, and anger will fill my brain. So that's all there is. Sometimes I will say mean and ugly things. Generally speaking, like I said, with practice, I've learned to recognize that I've gone there. And first thing I'll do is remove myself from the situation. I'll say, hey, I've got to walk away now. So I don't say or do anything else that's really ugly, whether I mean it or not. And then, brain chemistry doesn't last. It always changes. And when I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm no longer being driven by that anger, self-examination. Was my reaction appropriate emotionally? Probably not. Sometimes it is. How I expressed it, did that do any good for that? A friend of mine I had an argument with a decade or two ago, and I finally made my point, and they said, you're right. I see your point. You're right. That you get to be right. You don't get to be kind or loving or gentle or merciful, but by God, you get to be right. Congratulations. I don't want that. That's not who I want to be. Even if I won the argument, I wasn't the person I wanted to be. And so it's constantly revisiting that story of my highest self and taking myself out of that situation as soon as I can recognize it. And again, it's taken practice. It's taken decades of practice, and I still mess up, but I'm a little better today at it than I was yesterday.
Well, what do friends or your wife say now about, interacting with you? Do they give feedback like, oh, I can see you're really trying, it's a lot better, or is it, what kind of feedback are you getting?
Well, I don't get a lot of feedback strictly on that, probably because I mistakenly have chosen to not burden them with being responsible for how I deal with my emotions. So it's only in the outbursts or the only time other people are aware of it specific, or make other people aware of it, is in a bad way by having an outburst, or in a good way by saying, hey, I'm going to get ice cream because my brain needs it, or I'm going to bed because I need to be away from it so I don't hurt any. And they're supportive of that. It probably would be wise if I encourage them to give me more of that feedback. But then there's something in me that just feels like that's making it their problem and not mine. And so I'm resistant to it, which is probably something I explore because that seems unhealthy.
You mean sometimes essentially you're like, well, it's not me, it's you, it's your problem, and that's it? Or
well, no, what I'm saying is that if I rely on others very specifically for being able to tell me certain things, and they will tell me when I'm behaving in a certain way, but I don't make them responsible for monitoring my emotional state and constantly giving me feedback, because that's exhausting. Why would I want somebody else? But what I'm exploring in this part of this conversation is perhaps I am not relying on others enough to help me in that regard, because I don't want to make my reaction to my emotions their responsibility. But they might be able to better feedback, if I were open to that, which I've never really encouraged again, because, I was raised by a Marine, so damn it, we take that hill if that's what we're told to do. We shut up and we do our job. And I do have that kind of aspect to it. And maybe I should do that a little less. So maybe this is a conversation I should have with my wife. Is, can we explore how you can give me better feedback for how I'm doing and who I am?
Well, one example is, my wife does struggle with depression, and I would say to her, what's wrong? But I found a better way. So, how are you feeling? And if she says, I'm feeling depressed, I'll say, I'm sorry to hear that. Right. And that seems to work better. It doesn't solve things, but it helps. So maybe there's something in there that can be done with your relationships that would just, help them 1 or 2%. I don't know.
Yeah. We actually do have that. I have a friend who is a very strong mentor who also suffers lifelong clinical depression. And the answer in our family is, how do you feel? And the answer, good enough, means I'm surviving, but I'm not happy. And so that's the same thing as like, how do you feel? I'm not good. Our answer is good enough, which says, it's funny. I actually last night, one of my doctors called me because I'd written something somewhere that made him concerned that I might be a danger to myself. And I say, no, I'm not a danger to myself. Thank you for calling. That hasn't happened in a while. Like I said, I'm being monitored in some ways, and it just kind of startled me because I haven't. For me to be able to talk, one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is very few people will talk openly about this situation, about this illness. And I'd like to think I have some ability to articulate it. And I try to be as brutally, painfully honest about my own experience But what I've also found, that means that, especially if I'm talking to a medical profession for the first time, and they say to me, tell me about your depression. I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell you about my depression. But first you have to understand, I am not a danger to myself or anybody else right now, because some of the stuff I'm about to tell you is going to be stuff that nobody would tell you unless they were on the very edge. But I have made the choice to tell everybody how this is working for me, because people go through this without being able to talk about it, and that sucks. So I figure the more I can talk about it, the more open I can be about it, the more it helps other people who are either dealing with themselves or dealing with loved ones we're going through.
Okay. Are there any new protocols or things that you're working on that are helpful, but maybe you're not there yet with them? They're showing promise?
I wish. No, I basically the tools that I have, I know they work if I will use them, and a lot of it is about a lot of my internal conflicts are about not being self-disciplined enough to do the things that I know will take me to where I want to be. A really great example about that is exercise. I know it is scientifically factual that if I could just push myself through the discomfort of exercising, that I would get to the point where it's triggering happy, and that's the whole goal, is triggering that happy, the serotonin and dopamine stuff. But I just don't have the discipline to consistently exhaust myself like I need to get to that. So yeah, there's a lot of tools that work, and my life right now is most using the tools to get myself to the place where I can do the work that I love doing. And I find doing the work that I love doing the writing, the filmmaking, the music, sustain me in a happy place longer than just about any. It's interesting because I do see, I've researched a lot of this, so I get a lot of things pushed to me by the algorithms online. And, I was reading yesterday that LSD, which a lot of people have always pushed that towards me. I said, no, but the scientific studies are going, yeah, actually there could be something in it for really dealing with depression. And I'm like, yeah, but my addictive personality is such, like, I have a lot of friends who smoke pot. I live in LA, and they offer me, and I'm like, no, because I'm the person, if I smoke pot today, then on Friday, you're going to be seeing me in the alley giving blowjobs for a hit of heroin. I will dive down that hole, head first as fast as I can. So I can't let myself do that. And so the only way I could do a recreational pharmaceutical as a therapeutic for depression would be under the direct control of medical professionals. And I ain't got time or energy. So I'm looking at that going, yeah, that looks really, like, another thing is that apparently electroshock therapy really highly effective, and it's got a bad reputation because it's just not something I can bring myself to embrace or try. So.
Any other protocols like mushrooms or maybe ketamine infusions or other things that you've looked into, like transcranial magnetic stimulation? Anything that looks promising?
Tangentially, casually, in theory. I don't know that I would explore anything like that in practice, because the cognitive work that I've developed over the years keeps me functional and gets me into the place where I can do the things that I need to do. When I have bad brain juice, I just want to do what I can to survive it and get out of it. And then when I have energy and focus, I want to spend that on doing the things that I love rather than exploring new solutions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. Can we restate the name of the book? And I guess it's everything on Amazon and Kindle and Barnes and Noble and all that.
It's on Amazon. I don't know that it's ever gone anywhere else. It's Dancing with the Black Dog: A Survivor's Guide to Depression. I'm trying to figure out how I can. Generally speaking, I'm happy. I'm happy to give away digital copies because it's more important to me to help people. I don't think about money anywhere near enough. If anybody who listens to this wants to get a digital copy, can you have an email they could email to you that you could forward to me? I'm not sure I'm comfortable right now just giving out my email. Is there a way that, do you have any thoughts on how they could contact me?
Yeah, sure. We can put that in the show notes so that if they want, that, then we can pass it on to you. That's not a problem. Sure.
Perfect. I'd be very happy to do that. Yeah. I do giving away a lot more copies than I've bought or than I've sold. So.
Okay. Well, very good. Calix, thank you so much for coming on and being brutally honest. And, you're a good example of someone that's really working against, it sounds like it's just an impossible lifelong difficulty. So I really appreciate you being on this podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope it helped.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.